let's dive into the last part of Aristotle's methods of persuasion that we utilize in persuasive speaking. We're going to look at logos, which is reasoning and evidence. We'll briefly go over fallacies, which are errors in our reasoning, and then we will look at how to wrap up a persuasive presentation with your conclusions. So when we talk about logos, we're talking about using reasoning and evidence. We should be able to follow the train of thought, which is your reasoning, and we'll look at an example of that later. And we support our reasons with evidence. So when we are talking about persuasion, we need to have both of these components. We look at whether you are proving your point by your use of both of these. So proof is evidence and reasoning. There are different types of reasoning. In this class, we just introduce you to inductive and deductive. Inductive, I like to look at like an upside down T, specific instances that reach a general or a probable general conclusion. It would also include reasoning by analogies, which most people don't do in this type of course. And deductive reasoning is, I like to look at it like a funnel. You start out with a general statement and move down to a specific conclusion. And those are called syllogism. I do have some videos embedded. If you want to watch this optional video on reasoning, then you certainly are welcome to watch that. You, of course, access it directly from the PowerPoint. They do not play from these video lectures. So here's inductive reasoning. There are 3 pieces of evidence that supports the argument that you should buy an imported car. So let's look at this. My imported car rarely needs repair. My neighbor's domestic car is frequently breaking down and he is always asking for a ride from me. And my local mechanic has more domestic cars in for repair than imported cars. So when we're listening to inductive reasoning, we want to ask if the evidence is true. Is the first piece true? Is the second piece true? Is the third piece true? But we also want to be critical listeners, back tying in our listening skills. We want to be evaluative. And so what I would ask, is this enough evidence to support the argument that you should buy an imported car? Are you convinced with this evidence? Or is it missing something, right? Or why is my neighbor's car domestically broken down? Do they not take care of it? Maybe it's old. Are there other factors contributing to the issue? And so you start asking questions about the evidence and if it's enough to support the conclusion. The local mechanic has more domestic cars in for repair than imported cars. Well, maybe his specialty is domestic cars. I mean, right? So I would say this is inductive reasoning, but I would suggest that it's weak, that we really need some stronger evidence to support the claim that you should buy an imported car. And so where would we go? What kind of evidence would we want to hear? Maybe we'd want to hear something that is broader, maybe in the state or the region or the nation even. I mean, these pieces of evidence are very myopic or very small. It's all in my little Haltom City area, right? So maybe we need some broader evidence, more widespread. Maybe we need some more evidence that we could find through some research, like through Car and Dryer magazine or Consumer Reports, things like that, reliability reports. Maybe some of those things would help beef up or strengthen this argument. So it is an example of inductive. It's just not very strong. Deductive reasoning is called a syllogism, and it starts with a major premise, and it narrows down like a funnel. You have a minor premise, then you have your specific conclusion. So your minor premise is the piece that connects. It's the bridge between the major premise and the conclusion. If we didn't have the major premise, right, it sounds like this. All students eat pizza, therefore Claire eats pizza. well, wait a minute, wait. We have to establish that Claire is a student, then we could claim that she eats pizza. Okay, so with deductive reasoning, we would ask, is the major premise true? In this case, it's false. Right? And so if your major premise is false, you cannot achieve a truth out of a falsehood. So the whole argument would be most likely false. Well, let's pretend the major premise is true. Then we would ask, is the minor premise true? Claire is a student at Tech. Is that true? Sure, we could find proof that establishes that she is a student at Tech. So therefore, our conclusion is most likely true. Here's the funny thing about logic. Logic is all about being logical, but it doesn't necessarily have to be true. And sometimes we get those things mixed up. Let's look at that. Here's an example of deductive reasoning, but it's wrong. It's not true. Major premise, all cats are mammals. Minor premise, I am a mammal. Specific conclusion, therefore I am a cat. I am not a cat. Clearly, it is deductive reasoning and it's logical, but it's not true. Of course, we want your use of logic to be true. So we do have to be careful and make sure that we are being true and accurate when we use our reasoning. I love this other little example of reasoning that I've seen on Facebook and Instagram. And so chocolate is cacao. Cacao comes from a tree. A tree is a form of a plant. Therefore, chocolate equals salad. If you need help justifying your consumption of chocolate, there you go. That is another example of logic. Okay, so we always want to test to see if our reasoning is true, and of course our evidence to support that. We will look at some errors in reasoning here in a few minutes. So when we create our reasons or our arguments, we need to support it with evidence. Otherwise, they're just assumptions. And you always make your statement and you back it up with evidence, because too many people make assertions and provide zero evidence to back it up. And an assertion is just an assertion. It's an opinion. It is not necessarily strong evidence. Opinions work best when they're combined with other types of evidence, like some statistics or hard data. And so rarely do we believe people who just make assertions. We need the evidence to back it up. We also need to be evaluative. We're in the time of political commercials right now, and most of them are wrong. They're tweaking the truth to make it squeak by so it's legal, but because I do my own homework and I do my own research, I ignore basically every political ad because they are manipulating sound bites for what they want to say, and they're saying things, but they're not 100% truthful in what they say. So I ignore all political commercials because that's one of my pet peeves. You need to back it up with the truth, not twisting the truth. And because I study this, I'm in tune to it. So make sure that you have good evidence. You check and evaluate your sources. Use your CARP test. Right? And always make your statements or your arguments and you back it up. If you happen to be more visual when you are persuading, maybe this tree would be helpful. You have your claim, your proposition, or what you're arguing up here at the top. And then you would have your reasons. Your reasons would be basically like your main points for what you're arguing, right? And then you would have evidence that supports each main point. So if that helps you, sometimes it does. You would still create an outline according to what you learned for informative speaking, but sometimes this is helpful. You always want to have your main points worded as reasons. They shouldn't be topical necessarily. You want to word your main points as reasons that support your argument, and then have your evidence to back it up. Let's take a look at an argument about homosexuality. This is not reflective of marriage. Okay, this is just in general homosexuality. And let's look what happens when you just look at the reasons. We strip away the emotion, we strip away the evidence. So we have homosexuality is a moral alternative sexual orientation. That would be one side. That side would suggest that one is born gay. And if you are born gay, it's part of your identity and who you are. It's natural. It's an alternative lifestyle. And if it's based on identity and who you are as a person and personhood, then that would be actually a civil rights issue that we're talking about. The other side would suggest that it's an immoral, prohibitive sexual lifestyle. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind in persuasion and in argumentation, you need to use the same language on both sides, apples and apples. So moral, immoral, natural, unnatural. In testing, in science, and lab work, it's normal and abnormal. And so you need to keep this parallel language there so that it's a fair assessment and comparison. So this side on the right would suggest that it's learned and developed, that it is really about same-sex behavior. And if it's behavioral and what you do, right, that's different than who you are as a person. So our behavior could be unnatural or abnormal, right? And that this side would suggest that it's destructive. Well, if we're talking about behavioral issues, then we're talking about really morality. And so really, this argument is not even a good argument. It's not two sides of the same coin, because you can't really argue civil rights versus morality. Those are like apples and oranges. So what appears to be the same topic on the surface really are actually different arguments, completely different arguments, civil rights versus morality. That's why there's so much misunderstanding in this topic area. So what you would do if this was your argument up at the top in the dark blue, right? And these basically in the light blue boxes are your reasons. You would plug in your evidence that you have to support that. Okay. It's fascinating. When you strip away emotion and evidence, just look at the reasoning and how the train of thought goes. That's what you'll find. You often will find if this, then this must be true in reasoning. Okay, so we want to be accurate in our reasoning. Errors in our reasoning are called fallacies. And it doesn't mean, again, that things aren't true. It just means it's not logical. Okay, and so I have a handful of these presented to you on this slide. You have some listed in your textbook. If you're going into law, there's a whole lot more that you would learn. You often would learn all the Latin roots, like ad hominem in here in the middle is what the personal attacks are. It's called ad hominem. But these are some of the more popular ones. You all know the bandwagon. That's everybody's doing it. Everybody's wearing Nike shoes. Everybody is doing this. Everybody has this. Okay. And so that's called the bandwagon fallacy. So you need to make sure that you review your arguments and make sure you are not having fallacies in your thinking. It's hard for you sometimes to see. So sometimes having somebody else look at your arguments is really helpful. So I put the most popular ones here, or the ones that we would probably encounter mostly in these types of courses. I do have a commercial from DirecTV posted here that has some fallacies in it, and I also have a video. There's lots of great videos, but this one's a great summary of the top 10 fallacies. So you are welcome to check that out. So last, let's take a look at how to wrap up persuasion as far as our conclusions. In a conclusion, you still always summarize all the main points that you've covered in that speech. It doesn't matter informative or persuasive. In persuasion, you always restate your proposition or what it is that you're arguing. You also can do that throughout your speech. It's okay to do that. It's not a bad idea to remind your audience of what you're trying to convince them of. So feel free to do that in the body as well. Usually in a persuasive speech, we would have a call to action. So let's assume that you've persuaded your audience to do something or believe something. So then answer the question, now what? Right? What can they do? I would like you to actually now go change your diet and incorporate exercise into your health routine. But you need to make things easy for audiences to do and give us specifics. Don't just tell us to contact our congressperson. We're not going to go look up their phone number or their emails and go do that. So you really want it to be like hands-on, make it easy. And think about, those people maybe you haven't fully convinced. Maybe your challenge to them would be just to keep an open mind, keep researching, keep looking at new evidence, and reevaluate occasionally their position on the issue. Okay, and so a call to action is usually necessary in a persuasive speech, explaining what you want us to do. You always want to have a strong, memorable closing, so use any of those ideas for how to create an attention getter in a closing. Don't just fade away. Remember, no Looney Tunes or Forrest Gump endings. If you don't recall what those are, you can go back and check out the parts of speech mini lectures in when we were studying informative speaking. Visualization is also a great tool for a conclusion, painting word pictures. You can use positive visualization, negative visualization, and that's also very common for conclusions. It's a good way to try to be more create more imagery in with your audience, and so that's a great tool. I do have a link here to some rhetorical devices for debate in case anybody's interested and wants to learn more about debate. Although there are courses on argumentation and debate, but this would be something that would get you started if that's of interest to you. It's certainly not required.